This is the European edition of Breaking Banks, the world's #1 fintech podcast and radio show. We bring you the European unicorns, startups, founders, regulators, and leaders innovating the rapidly evolving fintech scene today. A truly localized podcast with both English and local language content, with some of the world's most well-known hosts and influencers in the fintech sector globally. Join us every week as we explore what makes the European Union a phenomenal proving ground for many of the fastest growing fintech plays in the world today. Okay, let's roll.
Hi, everybody. This is actually my first show in 2022. This is episode number, I made my notes, 113. And today we're going to speak about the ethics of gamification. So there is obviously some ethics behind it. But before we're going to do this, allow me to introduce actually my honorable guests today. I'm the host, my honorable guests today. And let me start with Melinda Jacobs, and I will invite you to speak a sentence about you and introduce yourself. So Melinda, ladies first, who are you? What are you doing? Why are you here today?
Yeah, hi, thanks for having me. I'm here today because I've been working in gamification for over, about 12 years now, since very early back in academia. And for about 10 years, I ran a agency that specialized in gamification. And I'm currently leading a startup along with my business partner that is trying to combine gamification and well-being together.
And what is the startup's name, Melinda?
Perkio. And the agency was called Subatomic. Okay,
wonderful. Thank you, Melinda. 12 years of experience. We're gonna prick your brain on this. Mieszko, hello. Also, welcome to the show. Explain us why you are here today.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for having me. So my name is Mieszko Czyzyk. I have a background in industrial engineering and also had a uncompleted master's in philosophy of science, which involved quite a bit of ethics, actually. So I hope I remember some of it. More concretely, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I'm currently running a company called Thanks Network, which allows you to create blockchain-based tokens, which allow for all kinds of gamification use cases as well. I will argue that those can be both good and bad. So I suppose that's the main reason I'm here. Looking forward to this talk today.
Good. Thank you very much. In particular, the philosophical part are going to be very interesting to speak about that one. Last but definitely not least, Kareem Derhalli. Kareem, say some words to you.
Say something clever. Well, I'm here because you promised me some additional experience points if I participated. But I'm Kareem Derhalli. I'm the founder of Invstr. We help people learn how to invest, and we use gamification in order to do that. And then we help them choose the right investments, and then we help them learn from other people as well. And then in the US, when they're ready, they can open a bank account, a brokerage account, and a crypto account with us. And I've been doing that for the last 9 years. And before that, for my sins, I spent 30 years being an entrepreneur in the financial services industry.
Wonderful. You've worked really with the incumbents as much as I know.
I've worked with a lot of very large, global organizations and I ran some very large global businesses. And okay. I'm having a lot more fun managing a startup that uses gamification.
All right, so wonderful. So I think we can see that today we have a great group of guests, and actually we can achieve a very holistic 360-degree view to the topic of gamification. And jumping into that, I think first of all, I always like to give a kind of definition, right? Because out of my years of experience, I learned that a lot of people use a lot of buzzwords, and they're all very happy to use it in English because that would mean that nobody really knows what we speak about, but the buzzword itself is great. So let us try to give an explanation, or let us try to give a definition to gamification. I would love to start, Melinda, starting on that. Actually, you as a consultant and being very deep in the topic. What is the definition of gamification? What is gamification?
So what I see gamification as is it's not so much about just game mechanics in business settings, but it's really understanding good system design, which is essentially what games are, is their rules, their restrictions, their stories, their narratives. And what good game designers do is they help those games come to life by making these systems clear and transparent for people to explore and engage with. So it's not so much, okay, let's take things from games and kind of push them into other settings because magically games are magic and they will do this, but it's looking at a holistic picture of what something is and trying to make it more accessible and understandable in that manner.
So it's the process. It's not only the design, but also the process, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's, you can think of games also as a big feedback system. And so if we want to encourage behavior in an app or a platform or an event or an experience, when we say, hey, good job, and we give the confettis and, you get points, it's not that you're just giving these points for no reason or giving that feedback for no reason, but you want to communicate to people, hey, this worked well in the system. This got you to where you want to try to get. And that's just one then piece in the whole big puzzle of how all these little interactions come together.
So a leaderboard only is not gamification. It's just a leaderboard.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah, no, wonderful. No, I'm just using one of those language apps and they introduced a leaderboard. Actually, they're really a pain, so to say. I'm not telling you where, but they are telling me like, yeah, Matthias, you must learn more because if you continue at that speed, you will not be in the top 10 and you will not come to Silver League, which I disclose hereby I'm in the Bronze League. So I said, yeah, well, okay, fine. I will not make it this week, maybe next week. I have the feeling this is kind of a missed opportunity, isn't it? So, but we come to this later. Yeah.
Okay. I think I'm using the same language app, Matthias.
Is that? Yeah, I'm not.
I don't think I even made it to the Bronze League yet.
Yeah,
I'm guessing I can guess what both of you are using, but or let the mystery.
I have to complete on my 2021 ambition to learn more Italian. Actually, so this is 2022. So I'm obviously not in the Bronze League anyhow in any meaning. So, Mieszko, do you agree with Melinda's definition of gamification? Is everything in what you would say is needed for the definition itself?
Well, absolutely. I think it's hard to say it better, and I think part of the problem that sometimes is confused is people look at incentives, right, and call it gamification, right? So economic incentives, that's actually what a lot of stuff is about in the blockchain space. And that doesn't, in my opinion, always count as gamification, right? So that's like economic incentives is not the same as gamification. It can be a way of, aligning, a community to achieve certain goals, for example, and blockchain in our case enables it to do it in a trustless manner, which also could be a buzzword. We can talk about that later. But that might be one of the issues. Maybe what I could add, you always, in a more business setting, it's a less holistic view than Melinda explained to us, but you have these things like serious games, right? So which introduce play in ways to learn something or to discover new business models and stuff like this, or maybe connect to your audience or your members or your employees. So that are examples of gamification that maybe are more true to the the meaning that Melinda just gave us, instead of just looking at economic incentives.
Okay, but before we discuss how we can use or not use gamification for businesses, Melinda, let us try to draw a clear line of demarcation in between gamification and games. Right? Because I think if it would be the same, we would use the same word. So out of this understanding, I would say there must be a difference. And by the logic of setting up the word gamifying, it is like game-ish, so to say, to me, which means it is not a game, right? So there must be a difference. But this is one of the big confusion points. Actually, I see it all and everywhere. It's like, we are in games as well. We gamify. No, you're not in games, right? Mm-hmm. So what is the difference between a game and a gamification?
Yeah, I mean, this could be an academic podcast of itself because honestly, no one almost ever entirely agrees on where that line is. But the general consensus is typically when something's for pure entertainment value, that it goes more on that game side, or if it's more self-contained without real world consequences, that's kind of where the line is. But you can also say, well, if a game is a system of rules and there's a clear goal and objective and, there's a good feedback system, so many things in life can fit within that. And I think that's the challenge of what do we do with the term gamification, because is it really all that different, or how would we sort of put these different things into their separate buckets when, it's a very much a semantics discussion.
Well, Kerim.
No, look, I think it's important to draw the distinction between games and gamification. I mean, games, I think Melinda's definition is fantastic for a game. It is a complete system where there are rules and objectives and ways in which people interact with each other. I think of gamification as being a little bit more trivial than that. And in fact, gamification is all around us. So I have a 6-year-old daughter who goes to school and she gets stars when she does well. And they have a little, ladder board system. It's like a weather system. She's in the gold sunshine when she's behaving really, really well. And she's in the thundercloud when she's misbehaving and being naughty at school. And then even when I was sort of driving to see my mother the other day on the weekend and I going through a 20-mile-an-hour speed zone, I got a big green smiley face because I was doing 17 miles an hour. And I'm sure then I think later in the day I was maybe going too fast and I got a big red angry face because I was going at 22 miles an hour or something like that. So I think gamification is to take elements that are used in games and to apply them in different situations. And I think, and maybe we'll talk about this later when we start to talk about ethics, but I think that's where part of the problem with gamification lies. I think, gamification to me is a tool you can, use it to encourage good behavior or to discourage bad behavior. But sometimes the way it is used can have negative outcomes.
All right. So you're already 2 steps ahead because.
Sorry, I don't want to go there.
Because we Germans have a structure, and and the structure is that we have, and this is maybe also quite interesting for the audience. After we did the definition, we will come to the application, and then we will come to the evaluation. So to say, well, do we think it's good or bad, and what is the pros and cons to this? Would it be fair actually to say that games versus gamification, that games normally always promise to be in a safe environment, that a game is made to win because a game is motivating, while maybe a gamified financial services process like a brokerage transaction is not promised to win. You know what I mean? Like you're not in the safe harbor then. Would that be a difference of games to gamification as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's that sort of line between real world consequences and indeed safe places to play. And of course, people can perceive games may have real world consequences if they're very invested in them as well. But I think that's the best line indeed to draw, because it is the biggest difference of, okay, what's really on the line here? Do I understand what the consequences will be in this environment?
It's this real world actually consequences I like a lot, because I always compare it like, what is if somebody is unclear regarding the difference of gamification and games, I always compare it like you have a gamified airplane cockpit versus a flight simulation game. Mm-hmm. I think it's very easy to figure out what the consequences are actually. But I think that makes it pretty clear. Mieszko, you want to say? Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe to add to this, I think also what's important is that the rules are clear, right? I think Melinda mentioned this, because if the rules are not clear, there is even a word for this, right? You're being gamed, which usually in English has a negative sound to it, because it is, right? If you are in a game-like setting and you don't know the rules, and if they have real-world consequences, that could be even worse, right? And you don't know these rules, that's the area where problems emerge. So I think for a game, it's important to know the rules. That the rules are transparent or discoverable. It's okay to discover the rules, but it must be possible for the players to know what's going on.
And as a player in the game, you learn the rules without these real world consequences, because you get maybe another 3 lives. And the worst that can happen to you is that you have to do an in-game kind of merchandising or in-game acquisition for whatever to get additional lives. But then you're back in the game. It's unlike that you're in the stock exchange and you lost the money, and then somebody will give you back the 10K you just burned in GameStop, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Look, I think that's a really, that's part of the value of games and gamification. If we lump them together for a minute, is that you can help people learn about the real world without having real world consequences, and it's particularly important. I mean, there are a lot of things in life that are important, but money is something that's important to people. Obviously, health as well, and it's good to be able to give people exposure. This is what we do, to helping them learn how to manage their money without having the real world consequences of when they make bad decisions of losing that money. And so it helps them build the knowledge and the experience, and then ultimately the confidence to go and do it for real.
So and then we are already kind of heading into the next section and saying, okay, after we did the definition, let us talk about how we can apply and how we can use maybe gamification in an entrepreneurial corporate world way and setup. And Kerim, you mentioned in the beginning that you at Invstr, you're into games since you started the whole thing, and you mentioned education and so on. Why can you share your motivation why you did this and why you're still doing it, obviously?
So look, we think that investing is fundamentally about the future. So it's when you invest, and we're talking not just about money, but when you invest in your health and your personal relationships and your money, this is probably one of the most important things that any of us do any day of the week. So investing is fun. By investing, we help to create potentially better outcomes for ourselves in the future. And when we first launched Invstr, and we set about trying to understand what the real customer need was, it became very, very apparent that people lacked the knowledge and the experience and the confidence to invest, but they wanted to do it, but they lacked the confidence to do it. And so what we realized early on is that we needed to help educate our members. And when you think about education, I think people very often confuse content with education and education with learning. And when you think about learning and the way that all of us naturally learn how to do things, it's by playing or by doing. It's by doing it hands-on. It's not sitting in a classroom. We don't learn about life by sitting in a classroom. We crawl around when we're 6 months old or 9 months old, and put our fingers and toes where they shouldn't be and hurt ourselves. And that's how we learn about the real world. So it's by doing. And as we were just discussing, the problem with investing is if you try and do it for real, you can get hurt, and that can have both negative short-term consequences and negative long-term consequences, because we don't want to discourage people from doing what we think through a bad short-term experience, from doing what we think is probably the most important thing that they can do in their lives, which is to invest. And so that's when we realized that we can use gamification and a game that we call fantasy finance to help people learn about investing without in a real world setting, but without taking real world risk. And so on Invstr in fantasy finance, everyone gets $1 million that they get to deploy, and the market prices is streaming real-time data, and they get to execute trades during the market open. So they learn about how markets operate. And they see the feedback. I think Melinda mentioned the feedback that our users get is instantaneous. Because we've got streaming real-time data, we have streaming performance, and you can see immediately whether you're making or losing money. And so we've created this, whether you call it a game or a gamified environment, for people to learn about investing without taking real risk. And we've had almost 3 million people around the world play various games that we've deployed.
So this means what some of you might know that the first company, the first bank I did co-set up was a discount broker back in the mid 90s, of the last millennium, so quite a while ago. And Kerim, this is why I can totally follow so much what you're saying. And what you're saying is actually a customer who loses money on the stock exchange is a burned customer. He or she will come back. So there's a reason for you as a company to have happy customers. And education means you have happy customers, and a happy customer has a longer lifetime and comes and will achieve his or her ambition, like having more money, maybe pension, whatsoever. So I would say to achieve that core motivation. This is what I hear out of you, like education, longer lifetime value. And by that being a sustainable customer, which also leads to a healthy company then, actually.
Yes. Look, I'm a huge believer that these days you need to have a very, very strong social purpose as part of your as an integral part of your business model. And we believe quite passionately that by helping our members to become successful investors, that they will in return reward us with their loyalty, their trust, and help us to be a sustainable business ourselves. So we think it's a very symbiotic relationship. We help them, they help us. But at the core of it is the educational offering that we have, and at the core of that is the way that we use games or gamification to enable.
And having fun, by the way.
Of course, yeah. We make it fun, we make it social, we make it easy. Absolutely.
Don't we have fun when we visit our accounts online? Don't we all have fun when visiting our accounts online? I normally have a lot of fun, tears in my eyes, but not because I'm so happy. Right. Mieszko, what could you add to this out of your perspective and your business experience? What could you add to this? Why should we take care of gamification? Why do you take care, or why do you think of gamification when you set up a business?
Yeah, I like Kerim's focus on education. I think, that as a goal of gamification is almost always worthwhile, right? It's hard to argue against that. In the case of what Thanks Network is doing, it's actually providing, people like Melinda and the companies the opportunity to develop gamified systems, right? So we're like an infrastructure provider, which, maybe it makes it a bit easier for me to say, well, that's not my problem what you do with our tools, right? So there is a bit of ambiguity there. But to explain how this came about and why we decided to do this, what we do. So in my former company, we used to create online communities. A couple of those were pretty successful, and we're building the online community for Greenpeace International. So this was the place where the volunteers are globally connected to build a better planet. And there are actually a couple of 100,000 people on there. And we saw that in some settings, in some countries, this worked great, right? People were able to find each other for the first time instead of being in some obscure database over at the Greenpeace headquarters, which is in Amsterdam, by the way, at least for Europe. They were able to log in and see that maybe their neighbor or maybe somebody 2 streets away was also a Greenpeace volunteer, connect and do something in their neighborhood, right? So this worked great, but we also saw that for some reason, which at the time could not discover, it worked well in some settings and much less so in others, local settings. So that's the reason why we developed our first gamified system at the time. And it was really, really basic. It was simply rewarding people with badges, which had no real world meaning whatsoever, to complete their profile and enter their, it was not even, I think it was the postal code or something like this. So it wasn't even your address because that's kind of privacy sensitive. But we rewarded this with this simple badge, and we immediately saw, the engagement and people making connections went much better, right? So this simple mechanism really inspired us to, take this, and the results for Greenpeace became much better, right? So people were coming to events more. They were finding other volunteers to organize things in their neighborhoods. So that really inspired us to build a system that would enable similar things in other settings. So
you really, sorry, but I need to dig into this a second at least. You really have data that proves that gamification or adding gamification components did increase the activity even then outside the community.
Yes, we have this case in the Netherlands. It's a couple of years old, but it definitely shows this, that the situation before and after, it was a drastic improvement of a couple of 100%. Mm-hmm. So not everything was perfect in this community. That's not what I'm saying. It still failed in some in some countries, for example, for various reasons, and it was a huge success in others. But yes, this modification definitely worked. Yes.
All right. So it's about engagement. It's about mobilization. Is that what I hear? Yeah.
Yes, in this case, yes, yeah. Right. Okay. So, but I think completing profile is actually pretty good thing, in my opinion, to have as a easy gamification goal for a lot of online tooling. But Melinda can tell us that there are thousands of others, and probably much smarter ones as well.
And as we are heading towards the break, but Melinda, we will burn all this down in the second part of the session. So, but let us first build it up. So actually, is it also that we, Kerim and Mieszko, would you also say you experienced your KPIs to improve by gamification, like cost of customer acquisition, customer lifetime value? Is there anything you could share?
Look, definitely. There was a public case study that Facebook did on our customer acquisition, which, they showcased us as being best in class because we had by far the cheapest customer acquisition. And actually, Snapchat did a similar case study that was public, but it's not publicly available today. And so we definitely were able to acquire users at a much, much cheaper cost. It was both down to the gamification features that we offer and also the social features. The two of the things that people love to do most on their mobile phones is to play games and to connect with each other. And we were offering, we offer both of those elements. And so we were able to drive down acquisition costs because it was an easier sell rather than saying, here's a brokerage account, please open a brokerage account. Very competitive, very kind of fairly boring proposition. But the other thing that we find is that our engagement levels and our retention levels are up to 7 times higher than our peer group. So we get actually double the engagement time per session of any of our competitors, and we're getting about up to 7 times the 1 and 3 month retention levels of our peer group as well. So it's good all the way through the funnel.
And one last sentence before the break, Mieszko. You spoke about the community on the one side, and then you added gamification. Would you also say that gamification is stronger than the community as an engagement layer? Or is the combination the good thing?
No, it's definitely the combination, right? I always recommend to grow community first and then add gamification if you can, then the other way around. If you invent the incentives first, and in some way, even unintended way, they are perverted or maybe not entirely aligned with what your vision is of what you want to achieve, you will attract the wrong people or attract the right people for the wrong reasons, and things will eventually break down. So no, community first.
All right. Thank you so much. So that was part 1 of episode 113, Ethics of Gamification. And if you want to listen actually to why all this maybe is totally wrong, what we spoke about now, and why there is the title Ethics of Gamification and not just the glory of gamification, stay tuned. We will be back shortly.
The FTS Group builds innovation ecosystems. We engage incumbents, investors, entrepreneurs, technology partners, and regulators to build trusted and connected fintech tribes around the world. We firmly believe that innovation in financial services will truly improve people's lives. Learn more on ftsgroup.eu.
I knew you would be staying because it's really an exciting topic we're speaking about today. It's about the ethics of gamification. Extremely exciting, and I promise you get 50 coins for staying on the show. Send me your email, and I will scan some and send them to you. Melinda, just before the break, we stopped by all the positive and the reasons why we should think of gamification as a maybe component to a business, UX, so to say, user experience and customer experience. But are we sure that there are not some maybe traps coming with that it could be misunderstood? Kerim, you mentioned in the first part of the show that, sharing kind of with your daughter's experience that when she's well behaving, she's on the sunny side in the reporting. If there was a misbehavior, she's on the thundercloud. Isn't that manipulating people totally? I would find that to be extremely awkward, right? Melinda, how explain my feelings on this, please.
Yeah, and I think that's the tough part of any feedback system, is that it has to be created by someone who has an opinion about what good behavior is or bad behavior is. And on top of whether or not you would agree that that's good or bad behavior, you also have to think about how you're delivering that message to somebody. In a way, it's more compassionate than just a big no or yes for the speed limit. That might be a better message, is, okay, let's package it in a nice narrative with a smiley face or an unhappy face to soften that blow. Where for children in school or for workers, when you have a hyper monitoring system that's giving feedback if you have to move quicker or, you have to go slower, it can be really demotivating to a lot of people and not necessarily created with the end user's best intent in mind, but rather from the perspective of the person designing the system. And I think that's where a lot of this ethics gets into play of is, are you being transparent about the fact you created this system and why you're deeming something good or bad in the system? And do people even know they're in a system? To get a little bit matrixy there, but there's also ways you can create experiences that people have no idea they're sitting in. And so they're getting feedback that they may mistake for real life feedback, as opposed for sort of this artificial story that actually they're sitting in.
Would it and this is, Mieszko, this is why I said in the beginning we're going to speak about the philosophical part, actually, because if you who are you in the system? In what system are you aware of the system? What is the carrot that is kind of hanging in front of your face? And is it like when we come to all this, is this your carrot, which is good for you as a player, or is that the carrot of the one who's offering it, which is good for the company maybe? And let me, of course, because it's kind of the elephant in the room when we speak about that, let me share one of those headlines we've seen while preparing for that show is, for instance, Robinhood faces legal action over gamification of investing. Is that one of those cases, actually? And Kareem, you're in the investing industry, and I play that to you. Sorry, I have to.
No, actually, Forbes described us as the number one anti-Robinhood, precisely because and so it's appropriate that we talk about it. Let me talk generically rather than talking about one of our competitors specifically.
Absolutely.
And I think Melinda made something she mentioned I think is very, very relevant. We talk about gamification and elements of gamification, and if people are interested, there's a really exciting September 2021 SEC report. I don't encourage people to read it, but there's a very comprehensive, and it's a pretty dry list on what they consider all the very many elements that they include in gamification. And I think when we're evaluating ethics of gamification, I think it's more than just the elements that you need to look at. I think there's a framework that I like to consider, which is what are the intents of the actors, the people who are designing the system. And are those intentions explicit and clearly understood by everyone on the platform? The second point is, what are the tools that they use? And more importantly, even, then what are the tools that they leave out? Because when you play a game, there are good outcomes and there are bad outcomes in games. And what we find very often in the financial world is that the elements of gamification that are used are only positive elements. And the bad elements, so I've done badly in my brokerage portfolio, or I don't get confetti, I get lemon faces instead. People tend not to use those, and so by leaving out the distribution of tools that are used, we can potentially create misleading depictions of what the real world looks like. And in financial sense, in financial markets, I think this is where it's really important from a brokerage and an investing point of view, you risk giving people the impression that investing is all hunky-dory, that there are no bad outcomes, that everything is a world full of confetti. And that way you start to encourage actually bad behavior or reckless behavior. And then the third, so the elements that you use, and unfortunately, I think sometimes gamification elements are used too selectively to achieve, outcomes on behalf of the originator. And so the third element is, what are those outcomes? And even sometimes where you have good intentions, you can lead to bad outcomes. And I think, as Melinda said also, as you just mentioned, it needs to be the outcomes. You need to be targeting good outcomes for the users and not for the designer of the system.
This is why I wouldn't ever look at gamification as just the elements of it, is because that's indeed where you get those not complete narratives, or you're only showing part of the system. It's games, again, it's not just that a confetti, a positive feedback, that these are games only mechanics, but rather they tell a complete story. And like you were just saying as well, is when there's a positive feedback, there most often is also a negative outcome also possible, because otherwise there wouldn't be an encouraged behavior with this wasn't the outcome I was looking for.
Mieszko?
Yeah, I was thinking perhaps it helps for our listeners if we explain what's going on at these brokers, unpack it a little bit, and maybe Kerim can add to this understanding where if I'm lacking. But basically, it's about the spreads being big, right? So the difference between the buy and the sell is kind of big, bigger than at traditional brokerages, which allows them to offer free trades to users, right? Because there is no apparent cost, but there is implicit cost because people are getting a worse price. That's basically it, right?
Well, look, some brokers, and without naming them specifically, have been fined time and time again, the same broker for actually generating worse outcomes for their customers than those customers would have been able to generate if they had been paying a $5 commission as opposed to a free commission.
Yeah.
And so you're absolutely right, Mieszko, that the outcomes that are being created through this gamification system at some of our competitors is creating bad outcomes. Bad outcomes for users, and that's exactly the case. And they use gamification in order to encourage more activity, because their intention is to have as much trading go through their brokerage operation as possible, because the more trading that goes through the brokerage operation, the more money they make. Because as you're saying, that in many cases they're failing, or in some cases they're failing to deliver the best price for the customer, and that's where they make a little bit of money. It's a small amount of money on a large volume. So the incentive of the system creator, of the brokerage, of the financial institution, is to have as much trading going on as possible. And that's why they use confetti to celebrate your first trade. And I think that's gone now. But there are still lots of other elements. There are scratch cards when you first create an account, you get given a free stock. So they're creating this hype environment, pleasurable environment, in order to encourage activity that will produce a good outcome for them, but not necessarily for the customer. And the negative outcomes for the customer are that they trade too much, or that which has an implicit and real cost, or that they take too much risk. And so they're directed towards activities that are, frankly, I think, totally inappropriate for most retail customers.
Mm-hmm. That is, Kareem and Mieszko, this is, as I mentioned, like I just calculated, it's 29 years ago that we started the journey for Direktanlagebank, which was one of the first discount brokers on continental Europe. And then I would say later in 1996, 7-ish, we had the first commission-free trading offers coming from the US. and Kerim helped me. I think that was Ameritrade or something like that. They showed up with. We can speak about those names very openly because it's really 20 years ago.
Yes.
So literally, history is repeating on this because there is, Mieszko, as you say, there is. I think consumers need to understand as gamified as something is. There is no free lunch. Full stop. And if you think you're smart because you're saving the money on the commission, you're definitely gonna be skimmed on the spread. These are the only two ways of making money for a broker. And then we have had the other problem always at DAB Bank as well is, yes, we've been execution only. This means we have no advice. Advice in banking is selling, right? If you cannot sell, you cannot make people trade. So you need to have something else that is incentivizing or mobilizing your customer base. Now we speak about gamification, and we see definitely why there is the need for ethics in it, right? So coming back to this, and as the show is part of Breaking Banks, we need to speak about financial services then. Coming back to this, would we think that maybe regulators will take care of this in the future? I hope, please let us avoid that, by the way. Just think about the Department of Gamification at a regulator. I invite you to create your own picture to this. I think this could not be the ambition. So, but does it need to have an owner in a company actually who's taking care? Mieszko, when you speak to your customers, is there an owner of gamification in the company, in the organization? How is that a marketing guy or to whom do you speak normally when you speak about gamification of a process or whatsoever?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So we usually see that this is either the area of the IT departments because they are actually the people implementing it nowadays, because almost everything is software, right?
Yeah, that Mieszko, I have to jump in immediately. This is about wouldn't it be my nightmare scenario? Let me phrase it like politely. Because since when is the head of IT department owner of the customer experience? Because since when would the IT department know what the customer wants?
Yeah, that's true. It can be a nightmare, but fortunately, no, it's fine. It's fine,
Yeah.
IT departments, fortunately, nowadays often also have user experience people involved and customer success people. So it's getting better, right? And to tie into what you were saying, I completely agree that what we're seeing at some of these brokerages, but also at different places, is nothing new. In the sense that, in my opinion, it's not a problem with the gamification; it's a problem with the not transparent rules. And basically the business model, right? People don't know that they're paying these fees. I don't think you have to regulate the gamification because that will be impossible, like you explained, and it will be not clear to who you'll be talking to. But we have lots of rules already in place, and we don't need much new rules to say that customers need to understand what they're paying for, right? There are a lot of rules to that extent.
I'm just devil's advocate, and believe me, the calling for the rules is mostly coming from the ones who missed the train to innovation. You know what I mean? That was a German construction of a sentence, but I hope I could deliver my message, So I missed that trend into innovation, and this is why I'm calling to regulate the one who is innovative. So I'm not saying that there's a good reason behind that. So Melinda, how do you see this, Melinda? Is this how we are discussing that? How do you see organizational setup there? Because I also could imagine that some compliance team comes up and says, "Listen, now we get lawsuits coming in by customers because gamification did drive them into activity they did not want to do." And at least in Germany, I could say that the courts would be very favorable for the customers, right?
Yeah. No, and I mean, I think this is where the fact that gamification, I would still argue, isn't really a thing within itself. It gets even trickier because I don't think there's really mechanics we can just put in and say, okay, now it's going to get someone to do something. Like if we use confetti, always somebody will click this button. Research also shows that isn't always the case. But I agree completely with all of the arguments on intent. And are we using these narrative forms? Are we using the way we build this experience to hide things or to mask sort of transparency, what the real consequences are? And, whenever any technology comes into question in terms of ethics, to a large part, it is up to the independent companies to regulate and design ethically, because it is hard to say what is ethical and what is not in a design principle. Because it's, hey, good job, you finished your account. How would you even start to answer that question if you should be allowed to have confetti or not to it? Would it be about topic? Would it be about theme? How much confetti you use? So I think I could imagine there could be some forms of audits in the future of which independent parties may come in to check to see the transparency level of the experience or app, especially in specific industries. But I think that's probably as close as we would be able to get to regulation, due to the fact we're dealing with unpredictable humans using an application of which sometimes, even with the best intent, we don't know what anybody's going to end up doing with it.
Yeah, we have Mieszko, I interrupted you. Sorry for that. I'll come back to you in a second. We have that regulation of advertising already in financial services. You're not allowed to overpromise. Which means you cannot say, listen, when you open up an account with me, you will have a 50 to 500% performance every year. This is not compliant. Mieszko, sorry, I interrupted you before.
No problem. If you don't, I will just be going on and on. So no problem there. Now, I think to add to what Melinda is saying, I also feel that, especially in Europe, there is this movement from the European Union to open up our algorithms, right? Because algorithms are controlling larger and larger parts of our lives, to at least make it clear what the rules are. And maybe in this type of financial use cases, that will also help, right? Because these gamified elements, in the end, they trigger some kind of, algorithms who make these trades and make these decisions. I think probably those type of rules will be more effective to open up the algorithms. Smart people will look at them, will post, articles about some systems being bad or good or gray, and that will already hugely improve the situation where now basically all of this is hidden and closed, and you don't really know the rules of the game you're playing. I think that's the core of the issue.
Kareem, is that the point also why you, as a company at Invstr, not only thinking about gamification, but also think about having a game which is clearly separated from your real world processes, to say.
Yeah, look, we make a complete distinction between the educational side. I mean, even from the UI, and the access to the real money, because both we don't want our users to be misled, and also we don't want to be accused of misleading people by saying, "Oh, I thought that was real money. I thought I was, or I thought it was fake money." Rather, when they lose money. So, but I think, yes, look, I think having open algorithms, I think is fantastic. I mean, to Mieszko's point, it gives us the ability to audit. As Melinda was saying, people can look back and say, was this appropriate? Was it not appropriate? But I think there's a recognition, particularly in regulated industries like the finance industry. The reason it's regulated is because there's an understanding that this is a serious industry that can have serious outcomes for the consumers. And therefore, it's regulated to ensure that the owners or the managers of those businesses have the right degree of responsibility and thought towards their customers. I mean, that's really what we're trying to drive to. So I think that the best way to achieve the right outcomes is to ensure that the value system of the company is appropriate. And if you can have a framework to say, I mean, if someone came to me and said, "What are your intentions?" I would say it's, our intent is to help everyone become a better investor and create better future for themselves and to take charge of their future. What tools do you use? We use gamification in education, and we use zero gamification when it comes to real money. So there's a very clear divide. And what outcomes are you hoping to achieve? Well, we're hoping that our users will get better, they'll have better futures, and that they'll pay us for that in indirectly or directly. And if every company could answer those questions very clearly, then I think we'd be in the right place. And it's not just narrowly about IT and systems and the specific tools.
Yeah.
I just wanted to be a bit critical to what Kareem is saying, because obviously agreed, right? If every company would be ethical, the world would be much better. But we have this system. It's called capitalism, and the biggest responsibility of companies, especially in the Anglo-Saxon model, is to their shareholders, right? So what's good for the shareholders is good.
Yeah. But okay, this is an extra session, and you see me leaving immediately my host function, right?
But my response to that, my response to that is to say, I believe quite sincerely that in order to maximize profit these days, you need to be responsible and ethical. Because I think the way the consumer awareness and our whole focus on sustainability has risen to such a degree that consumers are not willing, and maybe that you might say this is fanciful, but I think consumers are not willing to support companies that are not ethical. So if I'm a shareholder in a business, I'm going to want my managers to be ethical because I think that is the way that as a profit maximizer, I will make the most money. Certainly in the long run.
Yeah, I agree over the long run. But, for now, it seems consumers are loving these new brokerage apps, right? People are really investing as never before. So, I think there is still a road to get there. But I agree that largely the market will start demanding, more transparent and more ethical preference for those type of companies. Yes.
Well, I think it's that sort of balance in consumerism where it's like, I really don't want to buy from Amazon because I know the conditions and I have these ethical values and I want to buy local, but Amazon also gets it there in 1 minute, and I think in a lot of industries, we see this line with people in ethics when we're looking at the user experience is people do really want to buy from ethical companies. There is definitely absolutely an increase in demand for companies that are behaving in an ethical manner. But yet still, if it's like, oh, the user experience of this app is a little prettier than that app, it's hard sometimes to explain to people, yes, but this is prettier, but this is why this can't be prettier. And I think learning new ways to also explain that and educate people is also part of the road to good ethics, that people also can be aware for themselves of what's going on here in this situation.
So it looks as if the way of application of gamification in itself is already delivering another kind of unique selling proposition. And that in itself, I find to be interesting. Look, folks, actually, we have to conclude our session today. I'm very sad about it. It's 50 minutes plus already. So time is flying when you have fun. And normally we conclude this session with a kind of each concluding sentence by my hosts, and we do this in the reverse order. Kerim, you are obliged to start. When you think about gamification in an entrepreneurial environment, what would be your kind of sentence you want to leave to the audience?
Look, I would say the way we use it, learning to invest can be fun. It should be fun. Investing is a serious business, though. So having that clear distinction and being transparent with consumers, I think, is really important.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kareem. Mieszko.
Yeah, I would say just, stay true to your why. Why did you start your business? Look at those goals clearly, write them down, and try to invent fun games and hire a consultant like Melinda to help you come up with the intricate system design to achieve those, So start from the why.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mieszko. Melinda.
I would say quite simply is if you're thinking of using gamification in order to get someone to do something that they're not doing right now, probably you should stop and reassess because it's not the right reason. It's not going to be the right way, and it's never going to end exactly how you hope for. And it might not be ethical.
Wonderful. I think that is a perfect last sentence. And that was episode number 113. The Ethics of Gamification. Stay tuned for the next sessions of Breaking Banks. I do thank my guests for this very lively and, for me, learningful discussion. I think we all achieved a lot of extra coins this round. And thank you so much for listening. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Breaking Banks Europe, a Provoke Media podcast in cooperation with FinTech Stage. Don't forget to tweet us out, shout out, or post to the team at Breaking Banks EU on Twitter. If there's something or someone you'd like to hear on our cast, let us know. See you next week on Breaking Banks Europe.